The 3DS was very good to Kirby. Our favorite pink puffball got 15 different games for the system, 7 of which were exclusive to the 3DS. Now, a lot of these were expanded minigames, so if we just count mainline Kirby platformers on the 3DS, there are 2. Kirby Triple Deluxe and Kirby Planet Robobot, with Robobot being constantly revered for its unique sci-fi presentation and memorable storyline. But did you know that originally Planet Robobot didn't have any planets or robots at all? That idea didn't come about until later in development. So what was the game about originally? Well, we'll get to all that in this video as we talk about the complete development history and unused findings in Kirby Planet Robobot. But first, a word from our sponsor, Manta Sleep. If you're like me and you need total darkness to sleep, the Manta Pro Sleep Mask is about to be your new best friend. Not only does it block out all the light thanks to adjustable eye cups, but it also puts zero pressure on the eyes and was designed for side sleepers in mind who have always found traditional eye masks uncomfortable. And if you're watching this in the dead of summer, worried about cooking your face all night, don't be. This mask is made from ultra breathable materials and every part is machine washable. But this is more than just a sleep mask, it's your perfect companion to a midday recharge. Feeling overheated? Swap in the Manta Cool Eye Cups for a refreshing chill. Dealing with dry eyes? The Manta Steam Eye Cups give you steamy relief. Treat yourself to better sleep with Manta Sleep. And if you use promo code BETA64 at checkout, not only do you support the channel, but you also get 10% off your purchase. And the link is in the description too. And now, back to the development of Kirby Planet Robobot. Now, I know this video is supposed to be all about Planet Robobot, but it's still important to talk a bit about Triple Deluxe as well. It's an important part of Robobot's development in a number of ways. So if you've never played Triple Deluxe, let me break it down for you. Kirby is trying to get a good night's rest when all of a sudden a giant Dreamstalk lifts his house into the air. And it's up to Kirby to make it through this new fantasy world and save Dreamland. It's pretty much classic Kirby fare, but with a hook. This time he can inhale extremely large objects with his Hypernova ability. Triple Deluxe was announced for the first time in the October 1st, 2013 Nintendo Direct, but it wasn't called Triple Deluxe in the Direct itself. In fact, it wasn't even given a name at all. They just called it the latest side-scrolling Kirby game with no firm release date, just coming 2014. Over in Japan though, Kirby fans were treated to more details, like the name of the game, which was called Kirby Triple Deluxe. I don't know why the name wasn't revealed in the North American Direct. Maybe they just weren't settled on it as the final English name for the game, but that would be interesting if that's the case, because Triple Deluxe was carefully chosen by the development team. At first, they were going to pick a name to reflect the game's theme of adventuring through floating islands, but they decided they wanted to do something a little different since this was the 10th mainline Kirby game. To celebrate that, they wanted to have a name with an X in it for 10. And since this was the first mainline game on the 3DS, they decided to put the word triple in it too. Putting it all together, making the game called Triple Deluxe would not only fulfill all those requirements, but also makes the game's title in short form 3DX. It was perfect, and the name eventually made its way to the West as well as every other region that the game released in. Kirby Triple Deluxe was released in Japan January 11th, 2014 to positive reviews and sold 1.78 million units worldwide a little over a year after release. It was a success, and you know what we should do to celebrate that? Let's make another one! Only a few months after the release of Triple Deluxe, development began on the next mainline Kirby platformer on the 3DS. That would be Kirby Planet Robobot. But before it was all about robots and planets, turns out the original idea was just to make it like Triple Deluxe again and call it Kirby Triple Deluxe 2. So let me explain the plot of Robobot back when it was called Kirby Triple Deluxe 2. Basically, the sky opens up and a bunch of new enemies fall out of it that enhance the Hypernova ability. And that's pretty much it. As you could tell from the name, it was basically gonna be Kirby Triple Deluxe again. Many people on the team did not like this. They felt the need to break free from that same old plot, and the game's producer decided to take a stand. He told the team that they had to make this new game actually feel new and avoid any feelings of deja vu that people could have for Triple Deluxe. And that was going to be very, very hard to do. Shinya Kumazaki was the director of Triple Deluxe, and was still acting as director for this new Kirby game. And while yes, he had also gotten a feeling of deja vu, calling it Triple Deluxe 2, but the producer's decision to avoid any situation that might remind players of Triple Deluxe, well, that was going to be an absolute nightmare to actually put into practice. Think about it. Both Triple Deluxe and this new game were going to be platformers, both of which featuring Kirby, and both of them were being made for the Nintendo 3DS. Can't forget that this new game was also going to be using both Triple Deluxe engine and its game assets too, while running on limited development time of less than 2 years. Did I mention they were also going to be developing DDD's Drum Dash Deluxe at the exact same time too? As I said, it was a nightmare trying to make this game feel fresh and new, but still preserving that distinct Kirby feel. So, to make things easier, the team decided that they were just gonna scrap what story ideas they had so far and completely change the game's world. They needed to make this new game the polar opposite of Triple Deluxe's warm skies and beautiful lush scenery. And what better way to do that than to put Kirby in a cold, metallic world filled with machines to fight a giant mega corporation. And that's exactly the direction they took with the new game. Here's one of the first pieces of concept art that was drawn up of this new world. Dark, completely made of metal, and quite foreboding. Oh, and that see-through floating thing behind Kirby? Yeah, that was something the team considered putting in the game before the idea of the Robobot armor. Maybe this guy was like a robot friend meant to help out Kirby, but that's all just speculation. The team didn't want to stop with just altering the world though, they also wanted to change the gameplay on a deeper level too, by making this new game more action-oriented than previous entries in the series. And that is where the idea of Robobot armor came from. This would completely replace the Hypernova ability and any other ideas they had before, like that floating guy from the concept art, as well as a drilling machine, dragon, and a whole lot more. Now in the final game, there's only one set of Robobot armor. Sure, you can transform it with some copy abilities, but it is just one suit of armor. But that was not the original idea. At first, there were 5 planned types of armor that Kirby could use, called powered armor. There was the jet aircraft type, gear type, multi-legged gun turret type, spanner type, and driver type. Eventually, the team narrowed it down to just the spanner type, but even then, there were still around 100 different designs made for it, before they were able to settle on this final design. In case you're curious, these were some of the possible candidates for what the final version of the armor would look like. And one of them may look very familiar, because it's a reference to the Dragoon air ride machine that appears in City Trial in Kirby Air Ride, which is another Kirby game that absolutely deserves its own Beta 64 episode in the future. Now, as I said before, in the final game, Kirby's Robobot armor can transform with certain copy abilities, but that was not the initial plan. At first, Kirby's powered armor was just going to be a normal suit of armor that could punch things, and that was basically it. But while they were creating the suit's design, they just kept coming up with new ideas for things it could do, and after a while, they were like, why don't we just let it use copy abilities just like Kirby? And that is exactly what they did. It allowed the player to use unique mechanical versions of classic copy abilities and really solidified the powered armor as a core element of Kirby's new game. And since we're on the topic of copy abilities, in addition to scrapping the cute foresty atmosphere from Triple Deluxe, they also decided to scrap some of the copy abilities featured in that game, because they just didn't feel right to include in a cold mechanical world. So abilities like Beetle and Bell, they were removed, and in their place the team added ESP and Poison, with ESP being one that Kumazaki really wanted to add to a Kirby game for years, and now seemed like the perfect time. But it wasn't just new copy abilities that got the spotlight for their futuristic nature. The team also wanted to add in some older abilities that had long been absent from the series, like Jet and Mirror. Not to mention UFO. It just fits so perfectly with the new game's theme. And with the Smash Bros. Amiibos selling extremely well at the time, they thought it'd be cool to use them in the new Kirby game to revive the long-absent Smash ability, either by scanning the Kirby Smash Amiibo or finding one in the Smash Room. So with all this new stuff, we can't exactly keep calling the game Triple Deluxe 2 anymore. What should we name the game then? The team's first idea was to call it Kirby Hagane, which is Japanese for steel. After all, the place is going to be filled with steel, so it makes sense, but in the end they decided against it. It just felt too edgy for a cute Kirby game, and translating that name to Kirby Steel in the West, that would sound kind of weird. So their next thought was to call it Kirby Robot Planet, but that just felt too literal. Yeah, it sure is a Kirby game that takes place on a planet with robots, but we need to give it a bit more impact. Their next idea was to call it Robo Planet, and with one last little tweak, it eventually became Hoshinokabi Robobo Planeto, or in other regions, Kirby Planet Robobot. And that's also around the time they decided to change Kirby's powered armor to also be called Robobot Armor. Okay, so they got this new mechanical world, and they've got Kirby in a suit of armor, and that's all cool and awesome, but you know what they don't have? A story. At this point in development, the team had no idea what the plot of the game would be, so they thought about what they had made already. A world made entirely of metal, robots running around, and that's when they realized there was no better way to bring it all together than with a sci-fi story. Here's an interesting twist about Kirby Planet Robobot. For some reason, the team decided to develop the story and gameplay completely separate from each other, at least at the beginning. Sure, it was being made by the same development team, but they decided that they would split the team in two, with part of them working on gameplay and the other working on the game's design. Of course, that doesn't mean that half the team was completely in the dark as to what the game would be about. At the beginning of development, right after they decided on making this a sci-fi game, the team all came together to get on the same page as to what the world would be like. After that, they split off, with one part of the team being in charge of creating dialogue, sketches, story, and setting, while the other part was in charge of abilities, gameplay, and making sure it was all fun to play. So, since we've been talking a bunch about the gameplay side of things, let's shift gears and talk about the other side of the team who was working on Robobot's plot. First off, as we know, it's going to be sci-fi themed now, with the opening cinematic using sweeping cinematic camera angles to make it feel like watching a movie. Usually this would be the time where they'd show off Kirby's daily life, being all cute and all that, but for Robobot they decided to skip that part, and instead put all the characters into immediate danger. After all, players were already familiar with what Kirby was up to from Triple Deluxe, so instead, let's start things off with a bang, and set the stage for our new antagonists. President Haltman, CEO of Haltman Works Company, and Susie, his secretary. The development team thought about making the antagonist King DDD again, but ended up deciding against it. They felt like the idea was just too bland. I mean, they had just made new villains for Triple Deluxe, so it would be kinda strange not to do it again with such a dramatic world shift. Still, they weren't going to make him completely absent. They decided to include him as a clone for Susie to unleash on the player in the final game. Originally though, her name actually wasn't Susie. Kumazaki just wanted her character to use a real name, particularly one that was used overseas. Some of the names that were considered were Beatrice and Melissa, but Susie was ultimately chosen because it sounds like Suji, which is the Japanese word for digit or numeral. Sounds pretty sci-fi to me. There were several pieces of concept art uploaded of Susie to Nintendo's official website for Robobot in Japan. You can tell there was a lot of trial and error while attempting to create an alien superhuman that was also super cute. They tried lots of options, even at one point making her into a cat-like creature, but they eventually settled for this design, with her signature golden hair ornament with an H written on it, which you can't actually see on her model. You'd only know that if you read this blurb on the official website, where it lists it as her treasured possession. But it is more than that. It's an important clue to the overarching story of the game. In case you're unaware, or maybe just confused about Planet Robobot's plot, let me give you a quick rundown. First off, Susie is the daughter of President Haltman. That was a big reveal towards the end of the game, and it's why that hair ornament with an H on it is her most treasured possession. Now, before the events of Planet Robobot, she and her father were working on a machine known as Stardream, but doing so accidentally sent her to another dimension where she stayed for a very long time. When she finally returned to her dimension, she found her father had lost much of his memory due to his use of Stardream. That's where the events of Robobot begin, but the big reveal of Susie being the president's daughter was not the original plan. Here are some alternative endings that were considered by the team but were ultimately scrapped. One ending was that they would just not reveal her identity at all, or maybe just reveal it slowly through small hints after you sink a lot of time into the game, effectively just having little or no plot twist. You can see why they didn't go for that. Another option they had was to make Susie an actual robot, which Haltman made out of sheer loneliness of losing his daughter. Later on in the game, she would discover that she wasn't human, and it would be just this whole thing. But they scrapped that idea because the story was already getting pretty complicated enough. Kumazaki also considered making the plot twist that Haltman was actually a robot this whole time, but to me that doesn't really feel like much of a twist. In my opinion, the plot they went with was a good fit, though I'll admit, a lot of it isn't explained in the game. It was revealed later on Miiverse in a series of ask-a-thons. That's how we know where the memory loss came from and a bunch of other plot points about Haltman and Susie. Now, we can't talk about her without, of course, mentioning Susie's song. A song so catchy that it was added into Joy Sound for karaoke sing-alongs. The official name for the song is The Noble Haltman, and it plays throughout the entire game, with you unlocking its lyrics over the playthrough, and it's not until 100% completion that you get to hear it all. Kumazaki wanted to include the song to show off the corporate side of Haltman Works Company, and asked Hirokazu Ando to compose it. And guess what? Nintendo actually uploaded some prototype versions of this track to the official Robobot website. The first version sounds a bit more upbeat and jazzy, with electronic synth instruments giving it a much different feel from the final version. After Kumazaki heard the song that we're listening to now, he asked Ando to give it more weight. I mean, this is the anthem for a giant mega corporation, an evil one to be precise. So he went off to make the second prototype here. It definitely swung a bit too far in that direction, with deep, bassy drums that make it sound more like a military march. Kumazaki thought that Ando should add in a bit more mystery to the tune, so that way it sounds like it's coming from an unknown invader. And so this third prototype here was made adding in some pew-pew kind of instruments to get that otherworldly feeling across. From there, it was just some minor tweaks before we got the final version of the song. Prototype music of Star Dream's boss battle also made its way to Nintendo's website for Robobot. But before we listen to that, I want you to listen to this. That there was First Cry of a Newborn Star, and it's the sound that plays at the start of the third phase of the boss battle. It was intended to sound like a baby's cry, but more inhuman. And to get this sound, Kumazaki asked his cat Tom to perform it. You can hear Tom without the distortion too, because the cat's meow is left over in the final game under the name Wave 317 Guest B Voice Cyan. After this sound plays, the song we get next is Vagrant Counting Song of Retrospection. And, as I said before, we've got several prototypes to listen to. This first prototype playing here was created to capture the theme of existence beyond human knowledge of the galaxy. Very nice, very nice. But for the second prototype, Ando wanted to make things sound more intense, like this. After all, there is a countdown going on. It needed to sound more like a decisive battle, but it might have gone a bit too far. Having such an intense theme throughout the entire battle wasn't exactly what they were looking for. So to improve this, Ando added some quiet bits to the song that happen after intense sections, which you can hear in this third prototype of the song. This style here of intense sections followed by quiet bits was kept in the final version of the song too, and part of the reason I feel that it's just so iconic. So with the sound design, storyline, and other design aspects completed by one part of the team, and the action sequences and gameplay finished by the other side, it was time to combine it all to actually make the game. And it ended up being a huge pain. It was an extremely hectic end to Planet Robobot's development. Since everyone needed to be on the same page again to get this all put together, there were tons of meetings scheduled with the whole team to show off what's been done and what needs to still be done. And it was a helpful motivator to get Robobot across the finish line. Kirby Planet Robobot was announced on the March 3rd, 2016 Nintendo Direct, which was a little less than 2 months before the game's release in Japan and Korea. Because of that short time between reveal and release, I didn't really notice any differences between what they showed in the Direct and what we got in the final game. But that does not mean that we're done here. Let's take a look at what Robobots got unused in its files. And we'll start it all off with some unused scene data. Now we only have the file names for these scenes, so there's not really much we can actually see, but what they reference in relation to Kirby's Robobot armor is very interesting. Check this out. These are the file names for various copy abilities that the armor can transform into, except you can't transform into any of these in the final game. Plus, there are even references to the Robobot armor being able to copy these abilities, which are completely absent from the game, even for Kirby. Maybe it was back before they knew which abilities they wanted to include in the game, so they just put everything in there. It also looks like the Robobot armor could have copied any ability in the game, not just a select few. But without any of the actual data, I don't know if we know that for sure. Now how about we get to some stuff that we can actually see? First, there are a couple of unused items left over from Triple Deluxe, like the helmet cannon and the timer dynamite, which can both be put into the game and are still fully functional. Makes sense that they'd still work, seeing as this is all running on the Triple Deluxe engine. There are also some unused enemy animations in the game too that are technically fully functional, but they don't look quite right. It's obvious why. These were only test animations. They were not intended to be put in the actual game. We've got Dekaboo opening and closing their mouth. Then there's Alec just kind of pulsing or something. And we can't forget about Waddle Dee, who is, well, I'm not exactly sure what they're doing, but they look happy doing it. Now, there is one more animation that I definitely want to take a look at. It's super interesting because it's an unused animation possibly left over from the canceled Kirby game for the GameCube. In case you didn't know, there was a Kirby platformer for the GameCube that was planned to release in 2003, around the time Kirby Air Ride was released. But unlike Kirby Air Ride, this GameCube platformer did not make it to release. Eventually, the project led to the creation of Kirby's Return to Dreamland, but it was not the same game. For one thing, the GameCube game featured helpers, like in Kirby Superstar, and since the GameCube game didn't make it to release, they didn't end up using this idea for helpers until Kirby Star Allies. Now I say all this because left over in Planet Robobot, there is an unused swimming animation for King Doo called Top L_swim helper, which features them swimming. Now, when you fight King Doo in Robobot, there is absolutely no water nearby, and they are definitely not acting as a helper either. So instead of it being a planned animation for Planet Robobot, it's highly likely that this animation is left over from the Kirby for GameCube game, which not only featured Waddle Doo as a helper, but also had plenty of levels that required you and your helpers to swim through. So that's the development of Kirby Planet Robobot, from a happy fantasy adventure to a tragic sci-fi story. That complete 180 ended up being a good call. Sure, it's not the highest selling entry in the series, but it's a game that people keep coming back to and keep recommending to others. Kumazaki hoped that this dramatically different setting would end up attracting a new audience and show them what makes Kirby so great. And I feel like they did a fantastic job doing just that. Hey everybody, appreciate you watching to the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more Beta 64 in the future, consider supporting me over on Patreon. Not only can you get your name on the end card here for future videos, but you also get new exclusive content every single week over there, and that includes a behind the scenes video on this video. Thanks for watching.